Hello, dear listeners and those preparing to fall asleep. I hope, however your day went, right now you are in the most comfortable corner of the world, whether wrapped in cotton in your bed, lost in the depths of your armchair, or gently swaying in your chair, you are saved. Keep your background. Take a deep breath and let it go. Let my voice take you away. If you don't mind, this voice reaches you from all over the world, and I'd love to know that. Which heroes of Turkey are you listening from, or are you tuning in from another continent? And most importantly, what time of day is it for you right now? Perhaps while I'm here experiencing the silence of the night, the sun is just setting or breaking for you. Let me know in the comments so we know we are not alone in this quiet night. If there are still any among us who haven't subscribed to our channel to join this joyful dreamland, what are you waiting for? Click that subscribe button right now. Also, turn on the bell so you're instantly notified of our new stories. Today, I will take you to an empire where many waters have flowed under the bridges, old and full of scattered pieces, the Ottoman Empire. So, in these lands governed by Sharia, was alcohol known? Was it forbidden? Or was it allowed? Who drank it? Who was it forbidden to? Let's begin. The Ottoman Empire was a massive structure that ruled for over 600 years, spread across vast geographies, and encompassed people of different faiths. However, one of the most important elements shaping this empire's constitutional structure and legal system was the Islamic religion. Therefore, to understand the relationship with alcohol consumption in the Ottoman Empire, it is vital to first look at Islam's view on alcohol and consider the general framework of this relationship. It wasn't, as is commonly thought, simply forbidden or allowed, not black and white. This was a subject with many shades of gray. In Islamic law, Sharia, alcohol consumption is clearly forbidden. The Quran commands avoiding intoxicating substances, and in hadiths, alcohol consumption is strictly prohibited. Especially wine is explicitly mentioned in verses and hadiths as a forbidden drink. This prohibition includes not only drinking but also producing, selling, transporting, and even serving alcohol. According to Islam, alcohol is an evil that impairs faculties, prevents a person from worship, and leads to social problems. Therefore, theoretically, alcohol consumption was unacceptable for a Muslim Ottoman citizen. The Ottoman state, as an Islamic state, reflected this religious restriction in its legal system. Law codes included prohibitions and penalties related to alcohol sales and consumption. However, an important nuance must be stated here. Islamic law distinguishes between Muslims and non-Muslims. Sharia provisions were primarily applicable to the Muslim populace. Non-Muslims, like Christians and Jews, were left free to live according to the rules of their own religions. And in many Christian sects, wine consumption was part of religious rituals. This situation meant that in regions with dense Christian and Jewish communities like the Greeks, Armenians, and Jews, alcohol production and consumption were not entirely eliminated. So, something forbidden for Muslims could be permissible for their non-Muslim neighbors. This created a dualistic reality in Ottoman society regarding alcohol. The state's approach to implementing this prohibition also varied over time. In some periods, especially during the reigns of devout sultans or when religious scholars were dominant, prohibition was strictly enforced, taverns were closed, and heavy penalties were imposed on those who drank. So much so that in public squares, exemplary punishments were carried out for those who broke the prohibitions, cauldrons were overturned, and barrels were smashed. However, in some periods, especially during economic or political instability, enforcement of the prohibitions relaxed somewhat. Even taxes were sometimes levied on alcohol production and trade. So, the state tried to balance its religious identity with practical necessities or economic realities. This situation was an indicator of the Ottomans' pragmatic management approach. The Ottoman Empire was not a homogeneous, uniform structure. It would be appropriate to describe it as a mosaic. It was a state that held together universal humans of different ethnic origins, languages, and beliefs. This multicultural structure also manifested in the matter of alcohol consumption, meaning the issue wasn't lived with a single question just because it was forbidden. It was expected to be a tiny piece of a much larger picture. To understand the place of alcohol in Ottoman society, it is necessary to consider these different segments and the attitudes toward them separately. For the Muslim populace, which constituted the majority of the empire, religious commandments were very clear. Alcohol consumption was haram, forbidden. For a Muslim who prayed, fasted, and adhered to Sharia standards, it was expected to stay away from alcohol. However, the prohibition was not just a personal choice but also a social norm. Openly drinking alcohol, especially getting drunk, in Muslim neighborhoods was considered a great disgrace and sin. Indeed, the sale and distribution of alcoholic beverages in areas where Muslims lived were legally restricted. However, this didn't mean no one drank at all. Some Muslims, especially behind closed doors or in the taverns of non-Muslim neighborhoods, could violate this restriction. Divan, classical Ottoman, poetry, which abundantly uses themes of May, wine, and sake, wine server, presents the literary reflections of this secrecy. Of course, while the wine in these poems often carried a Sufi, mystical, meaning, it could also hint at real-life indulgences. However, for non-Muslims living in the Ottoman Empire, the situation was very different. Armenians, Greeks, Jews, and other Christian communities, under the dhimmi, protected people, system, had the right to live according to the rules of their own religion. In many Christian sects, especially Greek and Armenian Orthodox churches, wine was part of religious ceremonies and daily life. The use of wine in the ritual of Holy Communion, Eucharist, made alcohol consumption inevitable for Christian communities. Therefore, it was generally a legal and acceptable situation for non-Muslims to produce, sell, and consume alcohol among themselves and in their own quarters. Neighborhoods like Galata in Istanbul, port cities like Izmir and Thessaloniki, or Greek and Armenian villages in Anatolia were places where alcohol production and taverns were intense. Wines produced here were sold in taverns and consumed by both non-Muslims and secretly by some Muslims. This dual structure was an indicator of the Ottomans' tolerant and pragmatic governance approach. The state protected the religious sensitivities of its Muslim subjects, while guaranteeing the freedom of non-Muslims to act in accordance with their own faith and lifestyle. This allowed alcohol to exist side by side in Ottoman society, both as a religious prohibition and a cultural reality. Of course, this situation could also lead to tensions at times. Especially in periods when some sultans tightened alcohol prohibitions, non-Muslim communities could also be affected, and conflicts could arise. Alcohol consumption in the Ottoman Empire was not a subject that remained tied to a single rule. It was an issue that constantly oscillated like a pendulum between prohibition and permission, heavily influenced by the personal tendencies of the sultan on the throne. What one sultan prohibited, another could allow. Another might turn a blind eye to it. And sometimes, they themselves might taste these forbidden drinks. This made the history of alcohol in the Ottoman Empire dynamic and full of contradictions, almost like a swinging pendulum of forbidden permission. Some sultans were very strict adherents of Islamic law's rigid regulations and enforced alcohol restrictions with great seriousness. Among these sultans, Murad IV, known for his harsh prohibitions, comes first. In the 17th century, Sultan Murad IV closed all taverns. Along with prohibitions on tobacco and coffee, alcohol consumption was also banned under very severe penalties, sometimes even death. According to rumors, he himself would patrol and personally punish those who violated the prohibitions. In his time, alcohol was seen as almost a death warrant. Similarly, sultans like Osman II, young Osman, and Ahmed I also imposed alcohol prohibitions at times. These prohibitions were usually explained with justifications like improving public morality, ensuring discipline, and preventing rebellions. However, sometimes the personal piety of the sultan was also effective in these decisions. In these periods, underground production, smuggling, and consumption increased. However, there were also sultans on the Ottoman throne who exhibited a more tolerant, or completely different attitude toward alcohol prohibition. For example, during the reign of Suleiman the Magnificent, it is known that while there were no very strict prohibitions on alcohol consumption, trade and production were kept under control through taxation. In fact, some records indicate that some sultans consumed alcohol secretly or openly, especially within the palace. For instance, some sources claim that even Selim I drank in his youth but quit after ascending the throne, or it is narrated that Mahmud II had a more lenient stance toward alcohol, even clinking glasses with foreign guests. This situation suggests that some high-ranking statesmen and viziers in the palace also drank alcohol. In other words, what happened in the palace was often an area kept hidden from the public, operating on a "whatever the king says goes" logic. These different attitudes of the sultans were shaped according to the empire's economic and political conditions. Sometimes a prohibition was used as a tool to suppress social tensions or rebellion movements, while sometimes tax revenues from the alcohol trade became an important source for the state treasury. Especially during times of war or economic distress, situations where alcohol control was relaxed or turned a blind eye to could be seen. This was a search for balance between religious principles and pragmatic governance. In the Ottoman Empire, no matter how important a sultan's edict was, the real power on the ground lay with the ulama, religious scholars, and qadis, judges. These two groups played a key role in the daily implementation of Sharia provisions, including alcohol prohibition. So, it wasn't enough for the sultan to say, "It's forbidden." What mattered was how the ulama would issue a fatwa and how the qadis would enforce it. This could sometimes mean strict implementation of religious texts, and sometimes practical solutions offered by local conditions. The ulama, Islamic scholars and religious authorities, were the most authoritative institution on religious and legal matters in Ottoman society. They issued fatwas, religious rulings, based on the Quran and Hadith. The general opinion of the ulama on alcohol was in line with the clear prohibition in Islamic law, holding that consumption, production, and trade were haram. The ulama, especially during the reigns of sultans with strict prohibitions, encouraged them to be stricter on this matter and called on the public to obey religious commandments. The harms of alcohol were explained in Friday's sermons, and its sinfulness was reminded in sermons. Muslims not using alcohol was accepted as an indicator of their religious commitment and social morality. In fact, some members of the ulama themselves led strict lives, trying to set an example for the public. The qadis, on the other hand, were the judges who carried out the legal practice, enforcing the fatwas of the ulama and the provisions of the law codes. In cities and towns, qadis dispensing justice would rule on those who violated alcohol prohibitions and have penalties executed. For a Muslim caught with alcohol, qadis usually applied corporal punishments like flogging or sanctions like fines. Punishments carried out in front of the public were done to set an example for others. This aimed to reduce violations. Taverns were raided, alcohol barrels were smashed, and operators were punished. Especially in periods when prohibitions were strict, the inspections of qadis increased. Some even patrolled the markets to conduct inspections. However, the practices of qadis were not uniform across time and place. The Ottoman legal system operated with both Sharia law, based on Islam, and Urfi law, based on customary law and sultanic decrees. Although alcohol prohibition was a Sharia provision, it could sometimes gain flexibility through Urfi practices, meaning the Sultan's decrees. For example, when the Sultan decided to tax the alcohol trade, qadis had to take this into account. This situation showed how religious restrictions were bent by economic realities. Some qadis, especially where bribery or local dynamics were effective, could enforce prohibitions more leniently or turn a blind eye to some violations. You know how sometimes rules are bent even today? Similar situations could occur back then. When it came to non-Muslims, the attitude of the qadis was different. Non-Muslims could consume alcohol according to the rules of their own religions. However, selling alcohol to Muslims or encouraging them to drink was prohibited. If it was detected that a non-Muslim sold alcohol to a Muslim, qadis would intervene in this situation and impose penalties. Non-Muslims had their own taverns and could sell alcohol to people from their own communities there. However, it was necessary for these places not to be located in Muslim neighborhoods or to avoid excessive noise. When alcohol consumption in the Ottoman Empire is mentioned, strict prohibitions come to mind, but there was also a liquid culture that had existed for centuries in these lands. This culture was not limited to the secret escapes of those who broke the rules. While some beverages were interpreted differently due to religious sensitivities, others were part of daily life or special celebrations. In other words, Ottoman tables were enlivened not only with ayran and sherbet but sometimes also with these traditional flavors. Undoubtedly, the first drink that comes to mind is wine. In regions with fertile vineyards like Anatolia, Rumelia, and especially the Aegean Islands, wine production and consumption were quite widespread. This was particularly prominent in areas densely populated by non-Muslim communities, namely Greeks and Armenians. For Christians, wine was an indispensable part of their religion and was also consumed in daily life. They grew grapes in their own vineyards and made their own wines. The Ottoman state generally did not interfere with these rights of non-Muslims. However, it restricted sales to Muslims and collected taxes on wines. So, the state both protected religious sensitivity and did not forego tax revenue entering the treasury. Among Muslims, wine distribution usually occurred secretly and in closed spaces. The frequent use of themes like taverns, sake, and wine by divan poets is evidence of a secret wine culture's existence. Of course, while the wine in these poems often carried metaphorical, Sufi meanings, it can be imagined that real drinks were also consumed abundantly. Another important and traditional beverage was boza. Boza, made from fermented grains like millet, corn, or wheat, is a lightly fermented, viscous drink. Because its alcohol content was very low, sometimes even negligible, it was not considered haram in Islamic law. Therefore, boza was comfortably consumed by all segments of Ottoman society, both Muslims and non-Muslims. Boza was especially sold by street vendors in winter and was popular as an energizing and nourishing drink among the public. It is even rumored that some sultans loved drinking boza. Boza found its place in the Ottoman Empire both as a tasty beverage and as an innocent alternative that did not break religious sensitivities. Another beverage that emerged toward the late Ottoman period and became increasingly popular was raki. Raki, obtained by distilling fruits like grapes or figs and flavoring them with anise, is a high-alcohol drink. Although its origins lie in Byzantine or Arab distillation techniques, it began to spread in Ottoman lands, especially from the 17th century onward. Non-Muslim communities, particularly Greeks and Armenians, had a great influence on the spread of raki. Becoming an indispensable item in taverns, raki was consumed especially in port cities and urban centers. It also found a place among Muslims, but again secretly and in taverns. Raki culture brought with it the meze and conversation culture called the raki table, carving out a special niche in social life. Alongside these drinks, it is known that beer and other fermented beverages were consumed, albeit rarely. However, these were not as common as wine, boza, and raki. Beer production and consumption were seen more amongst certain communities or in port cities with intense relations with Westerners. No matter how strict the alcohol prohibition in the Ottoman Empire was, places where alcohol consumption continued existed in society. At the beginning of these were taverns, which created a culture of their own. Taverns, an interesting part of the social fabric of Ottoman cities, were not established randomly anywhere. They sustained their existence as establishments usually operated or run by non-Muslims, within certain rules and restrictions. They were among the socialization clubs of the Ottoman era. Places everyone knew about but no one spoke of loudly. Taverns were generally located in neighborhoods densely populated by non-Muslims like Galata, Pera, Beyoğlu, Haskoy, Kumkapi in Istanbul, or in port cities like Izmir and Thessaloniki. These were places where non-Muslims could consume alcohol among themselves and also where foreign sailors and merchants visited. These venues, where sailors who had completed long voyages came to unwind, were like a breathing space. Wine, raki, and other drinks were sold here. Tavern keepers were usually from non-Muslim subjects like Greeks, Armenians, or Jews. Since alcohol production and sale by Muslims were considered haram, this business was left to non-Muslims. This situation, on one hand, provided an economic field for non-Muslims, while on the other hand, allowed the state to maintain the general pressure of religious prohibitions on Muslims. In other words, while protecting the religious beliefs of Muslims, the state also watched over its economic interests by collecting taxes from the commercial activities of non-Muslims. Tavern keeping was an important profession for these communities. Taverns were not just places to drink. They were also important social spaces. Here, people would gather, chat, share troubles, have fun, and pass the time. Especially among men, they were a socialization area. People from different segments could come together regardless of class or profession. Merchants, craftsmen, even secretly some Muslim state officials would frequent these places. In taverns, not only alcohol but also appetizers, snacks, and sometimes entertainment with music were offered. These places, especially at night, added liveliness to certain parts of the city. However, taverns were under the constant scrutiny of the administration and the ulama. In periods when alcohol prohibitions were tightened, taverns were the first places to be closed. Their doors would be sealed, and alcohol barrels would be smashed in the streets. However, these prohibitions usually didn't last long. They would reopen either due to economic necessity or demand. taverns sometimes also had to act in accordance with the rules. They were careful not to sell alcohol to Muslims, kept their shutters closed, and tried not to make excessive noise. Their struggle to survive despite the prohibition demonstrates the resilience and complexity of Ottoman society. Taverns also held an important place in literature and folk tales. Tavern conversations, loves, sorrows, and joys experienced there became subjects for poems and stories. Although the tavern in divan literature often carried a Sufi meaning, it showed how real taverns had a place in social memory. When alcohol is mentioned in the Ottoman Empire, usually taverns and prohibitions among the public come to mind. However, the issue of alcohol consumption in the palace, where different rules sometimes applied, often presents a more complex and sometimes quite separate picture from the general view. It wasn't like, "Long live my Sultan! May your joy at the table be eternal." But it wasn't hard to guess what went on behind the curtains. The palace was both a place where Islamic law had to be upheld and a center where different cultures and personal inclinations met. According to historical records and observations of foreign travelers, it is known that some Ottoman sultans and high-ranking statesmen consumed alcohol. This usually happened secretly or within a very narrow circle. Especially during periods of increasing westernization and intense relations, in banquets with foreign ambassadors and guests, alcohol was served, or there are narrations that the Sultan himself raised a glass. For example, it is rumored that Sultan Murad IV was fond of drinking, and Sultan Mehmed IV, besides his passion for hunting, occasionally consumed alcohol but later repented. One of the known examples is the claim that Sultan Murad IV, known as the strictest enforcer of alcohol prohibition, drank before imposing the ban and that this prohibition stemmed from personal experiences. This is an interesting detail showing that Ottoman sultans were also human and did not always adhere strictly to religious commandments. Alcohol consumption in the palace was never displayed in public places and official ceremonies. This was vital to protect the religious legitimacy of the sultan and the state. If a sultan's alcohol use became known among the public, it could shake his authority and provoke the reaction of the ulama. Therefore, drinking parties in the palace took place in secluded chambers, private gardens, or seaside pavilions, with only trusted and close circles in attendance. Although there is some information that some concubines and women in the harem used alcohol, this was also definitely a secret, classified, and rarely seen situation. Another interesting aspect of alcohol consumption in the palace is seen in art and literature. Palace poets and miniaturists worked on themes of mey, wine, and sake, wine server, frequently encountered in divan literature. While these themes often carried Sufi depth, meaning expressing the intoxication of divine love, they also drew inspiration from real drinking gatherings. In miniatures depicting palace entertainments or celebrations, sometimes behind closed doors or at the edge of tables, elegant glasses and pitchers with alcohol figures can be found. This was either an artistic freedom or an implied depiction of some realities lived behind the scenes in the palace. Non-Muslim officials, doctors, translators, or craftsmen in the palace could also consume alcohol to the extent permitted by their own religions. Such individuals were treated more tolerantly within the palace compared to the Muslim populace. Of course, again in a manner that preserved religious sensitivities. This situation shows that the Ottoman Empire was not just a religious state, but also had a pragmatic and multifaceted governance approach. Sultans and state elites, while continuing to adhere to Sharia rulings on one hand, sometimes disregarded their personal preferences or operational necessities on the other. Alcohol consumption in the palace is one of the most striking examples reported of the empire's complex structure and the duality between theory and practice. In divan poetry, may, meaning wine, was generally used in two main senses. The Sufi, or mystical meaning, this was the most common and literally accepted meaning of wine. For Sufi poets, wine was a symbol of divine love, a deep passion and longing for God. Their intoxication was not from worldly pleasures, but a state of ecstasy from God's love, liberation from mortality, and reaching the divine. In this context, the Mayhane, tavern, actually represented a tekka, dervish lodge, or a place of spiritual purification, and the saki, cupbearer, represented the merced, spiritual guide, or the one bestowing divine grace. For example, the imagery in Fuseli's Sukasi Desi, water ode, or the rose and ghazals carry this meaning. Wine, in this context, symbolized a means to discipline the ego and elevate the soul. The worldly meaning, alongside its Sufi meaning, wine in the tavern could also be found in poetry as symbols of worldly pleasures, entertainment, companionship, and escapism. This became particularly pronounced during periods when sultans relaxed prohibitions or when more poets secretly consumed alcohol. In these poems, taverns evoked real places where friends gathered, troubles were forgotten, and joy was shared. Poets could express their escape from daily hardships, the slight audacity provided by breaking prohibitions, or simply human frailties through these images. This was literature's way of reflecting social reality and finding a measure of freedom. Images of the Mayhane and Saki were frequently used in poetry. Poets would describe their beloved's beauty like a sake pouring wine, combining both physical and spiritual allure. The wine glass symbolized longing for or the desire to attain the beloved. These images provided aesthetic pleasure to the reader and listener, while also reflecting the era's social and psychological atmosphere. It's important that literature shows how, despite the regime's strict rules and religious prohibitions, alcohol found a place among certain segments of society, especially court circles and the intellectual class. Poetry was a kind of tool for covert expression, allowing sensitive topics to be addressed without direct accusation or prohibition. This situation demonstrates how Ottoman intellectuals and artists resolved the tension between religious/social norms and their inner worlds through artistic form. In short, in Ottoman literature, alcohol, especially wine, carried a meaning far beyond just a beverage. It was both a powerful symbol of divine love and Sufi ecstasy, and a literary expression of worldly pleasures, escapades, and human frailties. Poets used this multi-layered symbolism to create works that were mindful of religious boundaries while also touching on social realities. We have previously discussed how strict the theoretical alcohol prohibition was in the Ottoman Empire, and the attitudes of sultans and the ulama. So, how did these prohibitions affect the common people's relationship with alcohol? The answer is quite simple. It was not completely eliminated. This often led to a culture of secrecy, shifting alcohol consumption from public spaces to private, closed spaces. So, it wasn't a case of everyone quit when alcohol was banned. People just weren't shouting, "I'm drinking," openly. The vast majority of the Muslim Ottoman populace tried to obey religious commandments and stayed away from alcohol. The mosque congregation, neighborhood residents, and families were mindful of each other in this regard and strove to live according to religious norms. However, as in any era and society, there were those who did not follow the rules and violated the prohibitions. Especially in cities where religious and social pressure was less intense and different ethnic and religious groups lived together, alcohol consumption was seen even among Muslims. This type of consumption usually took place in homes, behind closed doors, or in secluded corners of taverns run by non-Muslims. Wine or raki would be secretly offered to guests or family members at home. People acted with great caution, ensuring no one saw or heard. In taverns, Muslims usually preferred establishments run by known proprietors and tried not to attract attention. There are even tales that some Muslims would disguise themselves or change their attire when going to taverns to hide their identity. This was like a secret chamber within a room, a situation everyone knew about but no one spoke of loudly. Public reaction to alcohol prohibition was not uniform either. In some periods, especially when prohibitions were enforced very strictly, social resistance and unrest could arise. These restrictions, encroaching on people's daily lives, sometimes even laid the groundwork for rebellions. For example, the excessive strictness of the prohibitions during Murad IV's reign led to deprivation among the people, but these reactions were usually suppressed due to the Sultan's severe temperament. In later periods, as prohibitions relaxed, alcohol consumption among the people increased again. The illegality of alcohol consumption also paved the way for illicit production and trade. Especially in regions with fertile vineyards or known distillation techniques, illicit products were produced in homes or secret workshops. This illicit production also reduced tax revenues. However, as complete supervision was difficult, it could not be fully prevented. Just like the illicit cigarette or alcohol market today, the situation was similar in the Middle Ages. Despite the existence of religious and social prohibitions related to alcohol consumption in the Ottoman Empire, the production and trade of alcohol did not completely disappear. Thus, this order survived by balancing economic interests and pragmatism. This situation once again revealed the complex balance between the Ottoman Empire's religious sensitivities and its pragmatic governance approach. In other words, while it was called haram, forbidden, on one hand, the state did not hesitate to collect taxes from this haram. Alcohol production particularly took place in areas with dense non-Muslim populations, where Greeks, Armenians, and Jews lived. In Anatolia, Rumelia, and the Aegean Islands there were abundant vineyards, and wine production from these grapes was a centuries-old tradition. Wineries in these regions could operate legally. However, they produced on the condition of not selling alcohol to Muslims. Raki production began to gain popularity especially from the 17th century onward and was usually done by non-Muslim distillers. The state collected significant taxes from this alcohol production and trade. These taxes constituted an important source of income for the imperial treasury. Taxes collected from vineyards, wineries, raki distillation facilities, and taverns contributed to the budget. This taxation allowed for controlling alcohol consumption without completely banning it, while also opening an economic revenue stream. In other words, the state exhibited a dualistic approach. On one hand, it called alcohol a sin, but on the other hand, it gladly accepted its gift, tax revenue. Alcohol trade operated similarly. The produced beverages were sold particularly in the taverns of port cities and major metropolises. A large portion of this trade was also conducted by non-Muslim merchants. Alcoholic beverages were not only part of the domestic market but also of foreign trade. Especially in trade with Western countries, wines or other drinks produced in Ottoman lands could be exported or sold to foreign ships. This shows alcohol's place, directly or indirectly, in the Ottoman economy. However, this production and trade fluctuated according to the Sultan's changing attitudes. During periods when alcohol prohibitions were tightened, production and trade were largely restricted or even ceased. Illicit production and sales increased, while legal tax revenues decreased. Conversely, during periods when prohibitions relaxed, production and trade revived, and taxes collected from registered activities increased. This shows that alcohol's place in the Ottoman economy was constantly affected by the tension between the Sultan's religious sensitivity and financial needs. Taxation and control systems on alcohol not only restricted Muslims' access to alcohol but also affected market prices. High taxes could make alcohol more expensive, hindering easy access for certain segments. As much as we can learn about the internal dynamics of alcohol consumption in the Ottoman Empire, observations from outsiders also offer us important clues. Especially from the 16th century onward, Western travelers, diplomats, and merchants recorded in detail the realities of alcohol consumption among various segments of Ottoman society in their travelogues, letters, and memoirs. These observations reveal how complex and multifaceted the perception and practice of alcohol in the Ottoman Empire was. Just as foreigners might be surprised watching us eat sigkaf today, they too were not surprised by the performance of alcohol in the Ottoman Empire. Many Western travelers observed upon arriving in Istanbul or other major cities that the Muslim populace generally stayed away from alcohol. Especially the fact that Muslims did not drink openly in public, around mosques, or in neighborhoods was noted in their writings as an indicator of the importance given to the religious prohibition. However, this wasn't the only thing that surprised them. They also drew attention to the existence of taverns and liquor shops in port districts, or non-Muslim neighborhoods. This situation shaped their perception of the Ottoman Empire's religious tolerance and multicultural structure. They didn't create a simplistic narrative like, "Muslims don't drink, but the shops are full." Travelers particularly spoke of the liveliness of taverns in neighborhoods like Galata and Pera. Some travelers reported that not only non-Muslims but also some Muslims in disguise or coming secretly drank alcohol there. These observations provide information on how effective alcohol control was in practice. While there was a prohibition on one hand, there was a consumption culture on the other. Some travelers also recorded in their accounts the harsh prohibitions of sultans like Murad IV, and how these prohibitions were enforced. Barrels being smashed, drinkers being punished. This could be seen as a barbaric or excessive practice from their perspective. Alcohol consumption in the palace also attracted the attention of travelers. Diplomats and envoys reported in their dispatches if alcohol was served during meetings or banquets they attended with sultans or high-ranking statesmen, or if they observed the sultan himself drinking. Although such information was often in the nature of gossip, it gave the West an idea about life behind the palace's closed doors. Just as today, what the host serves at dinners is closely observed, the situation was similar back then. Travelers' accounts also praised the quality of wines and raki produced in Ottoman regions. Especially the wines of the Greek and Armenian communities were commended by some Western travelers. This shows that alcohol was not just a matter of prohibition but also an important economic and cultural activity for certain communities. These foreign observations demonstrate that Ottoman alcohol policy was not merely a religious decree but could also show flexibility according to social diversity, economic realities, and political situations. The Ottomans were portrayed in these reports as both adhering to strict religious rules and pragmatically tolerant of different cultural segments, yet a society full of contradictions. No matter how secretive or controlled alcohol consumption was in the Ottoman Empire, cases of drunkenness occurred in every period. However, the perspective on drunkenness in a Muslim society and communal life was quite strict, and this situation deeply affected the individual both religiously and socially. The logic of, "I just had a glass, what's the big deal?" didn't really apply. Getting uncontrollably drunk in public, especially during the day, was a serious disgrace and often did not go unpunished. According to Islamic jurisprudence, drunkenness itself is a sin because alcohol impairs the faculties of reason, makes a person unaware of what they are saying, and prevents them from fulfilling religious duties. Since one cannot pray or make sound decisions in that state, drunkenness was religiously condemned. Therefore, a Muslim being drunk was not only a personal sin but also seen as behavior contrary to religious norms within society. Socially, the acceptability of drunkenness varied according to gender and social class. While a man's secret drinking or going to a tavern might be tolerated to some extent, getting drunk and causing a disturbance in the streets or being under the influence of alcohol on religious holidays was a major source of scandal. Such a situation would tarnish a person's reputation in society and lead to a loss of respect. Especially for segments interacting closely with the public, like tradesmen, merchants, or officials, drunkenness could shake the trust placed in them. Neighborhood pressure played a significant role in preventing such behavior. Neighbors and family elders could warn the individual, or even complain to the qadi, judge. For women, drunkenness was a much greater taboo. If it was learned that a woman used alcohol or became intoxicated, it was considered a serious stain on both her honor and her family's reputation. Consequences like social ostracism, abandonment by her husband, or punishment by her family could be faced. Therefore, women's alcohol consumption, if it existed, almost always occurred in complete secrecy and behind closed doors. Drunkenness also held an important place in the state's legal practices. Qadis would impose penalties on Muslims found to have consumed alcohol or been drunk, according to Sharia law. These penalties were usually in the form of flogging or fines. Such punishments, especially when carried out in public, were done to set an example for others and maintain social order. During periods of strict alcohol prohibition, those caught drunk could face much harsher sanctions. However, a distinction must be made here. Non-Muslims could consume alcohol among themselves, and their drunkenness was generally not condemned as severely as that of Muslims. However, if they got drunk and caused disturbances in Muslim neighborhoods or in public, it could lead to state intervention and punishment. This is because the state was careful to ensure public order was not disrupted for all its subjects. This strict attitude toward drunkenness in Ottoman society reveals that alcohol was perceived not only as a religious issue but also as an indicator of social order and morality. A person's drunkenness was not only their own sin but also a breach of responsibility toward family and society. In the Ottoman Empire, while alcohol was on one hand remembered for religious prohibitions, on the other hand, it was permitted to a certain extent for health practices, especially as medicine. This situation can also be explained by the principle in Islamic jurisprudence that necessities make the forbidden permissible. In other words, alcohol, normally haram for a Muslim, could be consumed in situations of illness, essentially as a kind of medicine. This approach demonstrates the Ottoman Empire's effort to balance both its religious devotion and practical healthcare needs. Since ancient times, alcohol, especially wine, was a substance believed to have medicinal properties in many cultures. Due to its antiseptic, germ-killing properties, it was used for cleaning wounds, relieving pain, and reducing inflammation in surgeries or painful conditions. Wine or herbal mixtures were recommended for various ailments like digestive system issues, colds, and fatigue. Ottoman physicians, influenced by translations of Islamic scholars like Ibn Sina and ancient Greek medical texts, also accepted these therapeutic benefits of alcohol. In Ottoman medicine, there were fatwas and treatment regimens regarding the medicinal use of alcohol. However, this use had certain conditions. Alcohol was to be used only when no other cure remained, in life-threatening situations, upon a physician's recommendation, and in minimal amounts. In therapeutic use, amounts that would lead to intoxication were not considered permissible. This was explained with the logic: you're taking it for treatment, not for pleasure. Consuming wine with a prescription or using an herbal mixture could be accepted as an exception even for Muslims. In the rich pharmacy tradition of Ottoman medicine, alcohol was also used as a solvent in preparing some medications. Bases like wine were preferred for extracting herbal essences or mixing certain chemical components. Such mixtures were then diluted or combined with other substances for administration. So, the patient wasn't drinking alcohol directly, but the solvent property of a small amount of alcohol was utilized. This is another example showing alcohol's indispensability in the treatment arsenal. Especially in times when infectious diseases were prevalent, alcohol's disinfectant and antiseptic properties gained greater importance. Alcoholic solutions were known as central antiseptics in wound treatment or surgical operations. This was an indicator that religious prohibitions could be pragmatically relaxed in the face of difficulties brought by war environments or major events. However, there was constant caution regarding the potential for abuse of these medical uses. Physicians warned patients not to abuse alcohol under the guise of treatment and stated that unnecessary and excessive consumption should be avoided. In other words, there was no situation like, the doctor said drink, and then downing a whole bottle. Dosage and purpose were strictly defined. This relationship between medicine and alcohol in the Ottoman Empire is an important example showing the practical and jurisprudential sophistication that emerged in the Islamic world. While religious prohibitions formed the basis, human needs and scientific benefits were not ignored. This situation shows that alcohol in Ottoman society was not only perceived as a prohibition or a sinful matter but also, in certain contexts, as a necessity and a solution. In Ottoman society, women's position and social roles also greatly shaped the matter of alcohol consumption. While there were certain restrictions and religious prohibitions regarding alcohol for men, the situation for women was much more sensitive and strict. So much so that a woman being seen consuming alcohol was considered a major threat to her social honor and reputation. Therefore, if alcohol consumption existed among women, it was generally experienced in complete secrecy and privacy. Just as even today in some circles it's said, "Women don't drink." This mindset was much more entrenched back then. In Ottoman society, women's primary role was centered on home and family. Women were identified with virtues like chastity, honor, and modesty. Alcohol consumption, because it was believed to contradict Islamic morality and could lead to undesirable behaviors associated with drunkenness, was seen as an action casting a shadow on these virtues. Therefore, a woman openly using alcohol or going to a tavern was socially unacceptable and would lead to serious gossip and ostracism. A woman's alcohol use being exposed was also a source of great shame for her family. Due to these strict social norms, if alcohol consumption existed among women, it usually remained within the private confines of homes or harem quarters. Women could, albeit rarely, consume alcohol in their private environments, among close friends, or with family members. Especially in noble and wealthy families, the closed and protected environment of the harem could provide women with a slightly greater space of freedom. While there are hints in some foreign travelers' accounts about alcohol being served at entertainments or private gatherings in harems, this information is generally unconfirmed and very limited. Non-Muslim women again formed an exception regarding alcohol consumption. Greek, Armenian, and Jewish women could consume alcohol in their own homes or at their communities' private gatherings according to their own religious and cultural traditions. For these groups, it was not stigmatized socially like it was for Muslim women, as the rules of their own religion permitted this situation. However, they too were careful not to consume it conspicuously in Muslim neighborhoods or in public, to avoid provoking religious sensitivities. Although tavern scenes are frequently encountered in Ottoman literature or miniatures, depictions of women openly consuming alcohol are almost never seen. This shows how secret and socially suppressed a topic women's relationship with alcohol was. Because art and literature generally reflected social norms and acceptances, this strict perception in society meant that women's alcohol consumption, if it existed, was constantly kept under secrecy and danger. Fear of being caught, anxiety about losing reputation, and potential penalties forced women to be extremely cautious in this matter. So, for a woman, alcohol was often both a pleasure and a risk. This situation demonstrates how differently the issue of alcohol consumption was shaped for women in the Ottoman Empire, dictated by the standards required by their social status and gender roles. While alcohol was a sensitive topic even for men, for women it was almost entirely a taboo and a matter lived behind a curtain of secrecy. Alcohol consumption prohibitions in the Ottoman Empire were not limited to religious fatwas. These prohibitions were translated into concrete penalties within the framework of the legal system, both Sharia and customary, Orfi, law. So, alongside the warning, "If you drink, you commit a sin," there were also legal deterrents like, "If you drink, you'll be flogged or fined." However, the application of these penalties varied according to the Sultan's stance, the conditions of the time, and the interpretation of the judging Qadi. It wasn't a situation where the same penalty was applied for every drink. From a legal perspective, for Muslims who drank alcohol, especially wine, the basic penalty was the had-I-hammer, penalty for wine, which was generally a punishment applied with a whip or cane. This penalty was based on the Quran and Hadith. The number of lashes could vary, usually between 40 and 80. Had penalties could theoretically be applied in public as a deterrent. For this penalty to be applied, the person's intoxication or consumption of alcohol needed to be proven, usually through the testimony of two reliable Muslim witnesses or the person's own confession. However, in practical life, it's difficult to say that the had penalty was always applied strictly. Often, lighter penalties or fines were preferred. Penalties related to alcohol diversified further under customary, Orfi, law, applied according to the Sultan's edicts and law codes. In the prohibitory edicts of sultans, the closing of taverns and the complete cessation of alcohol production and sale were ordered. For those who violated these orders, sanctions like fines, imprisonment, or exile could be applied. Especially in big cities, the goods of tavern keepers who violated restrictions could be confiscated, their beverages destroyed, and even their shops demolished. So, there wasn't much luxury in thinking, "I'll earn money from this trade and also break the rules." The severity and implementation of penalties changed significantly depending on the Sultan's attitude and the conditions of the period. During the reign of strict sultans like Murad IV, failure to comply with the alcohol prohibition could even lead to the death penalty. According to some accounts, Murad IV himself would patrol the streets of Istanbul in disguise, identify those violating the prohibition, and punish them immediately. In his time, drinking was like playing with fire. However, during the reigns of more lenient sultans, prohibitions were more loosely enforced, and penalties were lighter. For non-Muslims, the situation was different. They could consume alcohol among themselves, and this was not penalized by Sharia or customary law. However, if a non-Muslim was found selling alcohol to a Muslim, or encouraging Muslims to drink, this was legally considered a crime and required punishment. Additionally, non-Muslims getting drunk and causing disturbances in Muslim neighborhoods or public places was also prohibited, and the Qadi would intervene in such cases as they disrupted public order. This shows that the law valued not only religious beliefs but also public order and norms. The authority for supervision and implementation usually belonged to the Qadis and Sabasai, officials similar to a police force. Qadis used their judicial authority, while the Sabasai were responsible for patrolling and apprehending offenders. In some periods, special alcohol inspectors could also be appointed. Penalties related to alcohol in Ottoman history were part of the empire's effort to protect its religious identity, maintain social morality, and ensure public order. However, these prohibitions were applied differently in practical life. They were often in a search for balance between religious principles and social/economic realities. While prohibitions and religious sensitivities regarding alcohol consumption in the Ottoman Empire prevented its complete disappearance from society's social fabric, they did not eliminate the need for socialization. It was at this point that coffee houses, which rapidly rose from the 16th century onward and quickly became an indispensable part of urban life, gained great importance as an alternative social space during times when alcohol was banned or restricted. Just as we say, "Let's go to a cafe to drink something and chat today," in the Ottoman era, this function was served by coffee houses, and completely alcohol-free. The introduction of coffee to Ottoman lands began with its arrival from Yemen via Egypt to Istanbul. Although initially there were debates among religious circles about whether it was haram or halal, it quickly gained immense popularity, especially in cities. Coffee houses also created a unique culture shaped around this new beverage. These were not just places to drink coffee. They were also centers of conversation, communication, entertainment, and even political debate. During periods when alcohol prohibitions tightened and taverns closed, coffee houses became a sort of refuge. Muslim men would gather here, discuss daily events, listen to gossip, tell stories, and pass the time. Coffee houses were places where people from different social classes and professions could come together, and the pulse of society could be felt. For example, a tradesman could sit next to a janissary, or a scholar next to a traveler. This created a space for social mingling. Coffee houses weren't just for conversation. They were also venues where folk narrators, meta, poets, and shadow puppet masters like Karagaz and Hasavat performed their acts. Traveling minstrels would share the latest news or stories in coffee houses. Thus, people were both entertained and informed about the outside world. In other words, coffee houses functioned almost as centers of culture and news. This made them more acceptable religiously and socially compared to taverns. The state also recognized this alternative role of coffee houses while implementing alcohol control. On one hand, taverns were closed, while on the other, the existence of coffee houses was shown more tolerance. In fact, coffee houses were sometimes even used as observation points to keep public order under control. However, as coffee houses sometimes became places where social and political debates intensified, they were also monitored by the state, and even closed during certain periods to prevent the ignition of rebellions. The rise of coffee houses provided an answer to the void created by alcohol prohibition and society's socialization needs. While these venues facilitated a new form of social and cultural development, they also reflected the enduring lifestyle and cultural dynamics of Ottoman life. Even though alcohol prohibition in the Ottoman Empire was a religious command and state policy, it was not always accepted unquestioningly by the entire populace. Of course, especially during periods when prohibitions tightened, this led to social resistance, objections, and even open rebellions at times. For the people, these restrictions could sometimes result not in a broken glass, but in the turmoil of a city. In other words, simply saying, "It was banned, that's it," often didn't work. The most well-known and strict prohibition period was undoubtedly the time of Murad IV. This sultan, who ascended the throne in the 17th century, editor's note, actually 1623, prohibited alcohol, tobacco, and coffee consumption under heavy penalties. His aim was to ensure public order in Istanbul, and the indiscipline of the Janissaries, and correct public morality. However, these prohibitions caused great discontent among the people. Especially tobacco addicts did not remain silent against these decisions. Those opposed to the prohibitions continued to drink secretly. Taverns went underground. Secret drinking parties were organized in homes. The rumors that the Sultan himself would patrol among the people in disguise to catch and immediately punish violators demonstrate both the resistance and the Sultan's determination. However, these harsh practices did not completely suppress the reaction. Often, prohibitions would relax when the Sultan's pressure eased or when a new Sultan ascended the throne. It wasn't just passive resistance. Sometimes open rebellions also occurred. Especially during periods when the Janissary Corps began to deteriorate, issues related to alcohol consumption and taverns could become one of the elements igniting the fuse of rebellions. The Janissaries' loss of discipline and their oppression of the people and tradesmen often emerged in environments where alcohol was consumed. The state's attempts to tighten alcohol restrictions could be perceived by the Janissaries as interference with their freedoms and caused them to rebel. This situation shows that alcohol became not just a beverage but also a symbol of political and social tensions. There were also various reactions among the people against the prohibitions. Especially non-Muslim communities who made a living from wine production and tavern keeping suffered great economic damage due to the prohibitions. This led to livelihood concerns and could sometimes result in collective complaints or gatherings carrying the potential for rebellion. The state generally followed a balancing policy rather than acting completely harshly against such reactions. Sometimes it would relax prohibitions to soften the backlash. Because the empire's multicultural structure required considering the sensitivities of different segments. Resistance against alcohol prohibition also found echoes in literature and folk tales. Poets could imply subtle criticism of the prohibitions or a quest for freedom using themes of May and Mayhane. Jokes and stories told among the people humorously narrated the cleverness of those who broke the prohibitions or the absurd events caused by them. These social resistances and rebellions show that the Ottoman central authorities' power could not completely change certain habits and the will of specific segments. Prohibitions often increased secret consumption and made control difficult. And so, we have come to the end of this complex and dualistic journey of alcohol in the Ottoman Empire. This topic, which appears at first glance to be a simple matter of prohibition, actually transforms into a rich story revealing the empire's multicultural nature, the delicate balance between religious sensitivities and state pragmatism, and the unchanging aspects of human behavior. Alcohol in the Ottoman Empire was never a black and white issue that could be approached from a single perspective. It was a vibrant tableau showing the period's brilliance with its shades of gray, contradictions, and constant flux. We have seen that Islamic law strictly forbade alcohol for Muslims. Quranic verses and hadiths clearly prohibited alcohol consumption, production, and trade. These religious rulings were reflected in the Ottoman legal system and were tried to be followed by the ulama and qadis. Muslims who consumed alcohol faced sanctions like flogging or fines when caught in public, and their social reputations were damaged. Drunkenness was a great disgrace and sin from both religious and social moral perspectives. However, the Ottoman Empire was not composed of a single faith but was a multi-ethnic structure of different religions and cultures. Non-Muslim subjects like Greeks, Armenians, and Jews could consume, and even produce and sell, wine and other alcoholic beverages according to the conditions of their own religions. This situation allowed taverns to exist vibrantly, especially in port cities and non-Muslim neighborhoods. While taverns were usually closed or secret places for Muslims, they were important social gathering points for non-Muslims and foreigners. The Ottomans approached these differences with tolerance, preferring to apply religious prohibitions only on their Muslim subjects, thus preserving social peace and economic balance. The attitudes of the sultans constituted the most variable aspect of alcohol policy. While some sultans like Murad IV enforced alcohol prohibition in the harshest and most merciless manner, other sultans exhibited a more lenient approach. Some even consumed alcohol themselves in the secret corners of the palace. This variability stemmed directly from both the sultan's personal beliefs and the empire's economic and political needs of the time. Because the taxes obtained from alcohol could be an important source of income for the state treasury. Alcohol in the Ottoman Empire was not just a beverage but also a cultural symbol and form of expression. In divan poetry, May and Saki carry deep meanings not only of worldly pleasures but also of Sufi love and divine ecstasy. This is an example of how artists and intellectuals express their emotional and spiritual experiences even within strict religious norms. On the other hand, in the field of medicine, alcohol could be used as medicine in measured amounts and upon a physician's recommendation, benefiting from its disinfectant and solvent properties. This also shows the Ottoman Empire's pragmatic and scientifically open-minded side. In conclusion, alcohol consumption in the Ottoman Empire was, for centuries, in a state of constant tension and balance, oscillating between religious commands, social norms, economic realities, and personal preferences. While on one hand trying to follow Islam's strict prohibitions, on the other hand, it managed to show resilience against the different lifestyles offered by its multicultural structure, economic needs, and even human frailties. This complex history once again proves that the Ottoman Empire was not just a state but also a dynamic and multifaceted society that held together different beliefs and ways of life. We hope that this interesting and multi-layered history of alcohol in the Ottoman Empire has made you think and provided a pleasant slumber. What other historical adventures would you like to embark on next? Don't forget to let us know in the comments. For now, deep sleeps.